Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, Emotional Intelligence and Leadership, What's Needed During Unstable Times. My name is Michelle Bryan, and I'll be your webinar moderator for this session. If you're not familiar with us, CCL is a top-ranked global provider of leadership development. Our cutting-edge solutions are steeped in extensive research, and we work with hundreds of thousands of leaders at all levels. We thank you for joining this webinar today to learn more about the power of emotional intelligence in leadership and uncover ways that leaders can leverage EI skills to improve effectiveness. So I'm so happy to introduce our presenter today. Shelley Tompkins is a leadership solutions partner here at CCL. Her focus is designing and delivering highly regarded leadership programs for managers and executives. Shelley brings over 20 years of experience in market, leading organizations in Fortune 500 companies. Her collaborative leadership style is used to build consensus and improve skills and knowledge, which has led to improved employee performance and engagement and leadership effectiveness and improved organizational outcomes. So happy you're here with us, Shelley. Welcome, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So everyone, I want to start by just thanking you for taking the time to join us today. And it's my hope that as I go through this material today, that you'll walk away with at least 2 or 3 valuable nuggets. What I can tell you is that we do offer full sessions on this topic. We've got a 4-hour live online session, and I prep the presentation with that comment because I really will only have opportunities to cover really high-level content on this topic. So if you want to dive deeper, you want transformation to take place in your teams, definitely reach out to us because we would be happy to work with you further. So with that being said, I want to dive right in. And I'd like for us to use the chat box to answer this question. And let me kind of preface it, set the stage a little bit. Needless to say, we are in overload with emotions. We've got COVID-19. That's brought out all kinds of emotions, fear, uncertainty. I could go on and on and on. We have protests that we're experiencing here in the States, and I know even abroad, and we have participants on the call from all over the world. So we've got Black Lives Matter protests here, and a lot of uncertainty regarding the market, our retirement, are we going to have jobs? What all is going on? So I really would like for you to share just one word in the chat. How do you feel? Considering all that's going on, how do you feel? So I'm going to take a minute just to see. Again, if you could just enter your response in the chat box. And I'm seeing stressed, encouraged, overwhelmed, anxious, concerned, uncertain, ambivalent, overwhelmed, not happy, reflective, perplexed, hopeful, and uncertain. And I know we're eager, tired. We're dealing with a lot of emotions. And quite frankly, I think most of us, with everything that's going on, we probably know someone that was impacted by COVID-19. What do we say? Some of our colleagues who have been impacted in some way by the Black Lives Matter protest. Some people have lost jobs. I personally was furloughed for 5 weeks. And so what do we say? How can we help people to see how, see that we see them and that we care about them? Well, I thought I would share with you a little note that was sent to me, and this was shortly after kind of the Black Lives Matter protests were, gaining some recognition across the country. And this is what a leader said to me. She said, Shelley, I just wanted to check on you to see how you're feeling about everything taking place in the world right now. I was nervous about reaching out because I was struggling to find the right words until I saw this quote. I decided to go with my heart and just do it. I'd rather imperfectly let you know I care than to stay silent. And she quoted Dr. Martin Luther King, where it says, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And so I share that with you because, honestly, I don't think any of us have the right words to say. Even responding to this, what were the right words I could share with this leader? But what I can tell you is how this made me feel. I felt cared for. I felt loved. And this was in the workplace. This was a manager that was within my chain. And so what we're going to talk about today is just really kind of dealing with emotions in the workplace and a few takeaways that I'm hoping will help you to think about perhaps the right words, but more importantly, the right things to do when interacting with others. So my hope is that you'll understand the role that emotions play within our work interactions. And while this is a work topic, I'm going to tell you everything that I will cover here today, you can apply it to not only work, but home and at play. We're going to look at some specific ways to leverage our skills in emotional intelligence so that we can be more effective. I'll share some strategies and some tools that you can use right away to help regulate your emotional responses. And then we're going to talk about the importance of practicing empathy by imagining yourself in another person's shoes. So with that being said, I wanted to start here with a discussion about emotions. I mean, you can't talk about emotional intelligence without starting at the foundation around emotions. And, this may seem like a topic that we don't really address at work. Emotions, however, provide information that is central to leadership. They play an essential role in how we process information, how we make decisions, and how we behave. And so understanding and using emotions more wisely will help us with our own behaviors and those of the people in which we interact with. Now, as you see here, this is a range of emotions. What feelings do you experience each day? Do you even know the cause of your emotions? Well, as humans, we have a wide range of emotions, and so it's important that we recognize our own emotions and those emotions of other people. And it's important to not assign value or judgment to those emotions. Someone might say, I feel sad about this, and then you're in a conversation, and someone could say, well, you shouldn't feel sad. Well, no, don't dismiss the fact that I feel sad. I do feel sad. So let's be more cautious of how we judge and place value on emotions that people have. So the next couple of slides are going to help us to recognize and label different emotions, help us to better understand emotions so that we can do a better job at regulating them. What you see here on the screen, this is what we call the mood meter, and it describes the range of emotions that we experience. This was developed by Dr. Mark Brackett, who is a Yale professor and founding director of the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence, and it's really about the power of unlocking our emotions. What Dr. Brackett believes is that emotions are the most powerful force inside the workplace, and that they influence everything from leadership to effectiveness to building and maintaining complete relationships. So this mood meter is an evidence-informed tool for building emotional intelligence, and it basically says that emotions can be described in terms of how pleasant they are and how much energy they generate. So let's look at this a little more closely. If you look in the yellow zone, the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that these emotions are high energy and high pleasantness. So words like joyful, hopeful, playful, excited, inspired. And then you have the green zone, a low energy, but still high pleasantness. Feeling of calm, carefree, balanced, mellow. Then there's a red zone. So here we've got high energy and low pleasantness. Words like irritated, angry, furious, stressed. And then the blue zone, low energy, low pleasantness. This is when we're feeling sad or uneasy or depressed or exhausted. So notice I'm actually not saying that any of these are good or bad. This is really a way of thinking about our emotions so that we can identify our own emotions and those of others, as well as how we might be perceived. So I've got a little activity that I want you to do within the chat box. So I want you to think of a time when expressing an emotion as a leader was effective. Looking at the mood meter, which zone were you in? So in the chat box, either say yellow, green, blue, or red. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of green, a lot of yellow, lots of green, lots of yellow, some blue, a red, 2 reds at least, 3 reds. So what's kind of interesting here, and remember, I didn't want us to assign value or judgment. What I would say is that I think most of us would agree we'd rather be in the yellow and the green zones because they do represent a high degree of pleasantness. But sometimes you find yourself in the red and the blue because that's just where you are. And many times these are places where change or innovation, something has to take place. So again, I appreciate all quadrants being represented in that activity. So our emotions weave through every interaction in our lives, like I said, work, home, and at play. Our emotions come into play as we deal with changes that occur in our lives or even when uncertainty presents itself, and there seems to be a lot of that. You know, they influence how we react to situations, and we express emotions when we interact with our colleagues. Our abilities to collaborate and resolve conflict, all of those are influenced by our emotions. And emotions play a role in the amount of effort we demonstrate in our psychological health and our moods. And so emotional intelligence can help us understand why we feel the way we do and better regulate our actions. So I want to, now that we've kind of laid a foundation a little bit around emotions, I want us to turn our attention specifically to the concept of emotional intelligence. I love this definition out of the Oxford Dictionary, which says it's the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. I guess I love this so much because it really does bring in all the core components of knowing yourself, but it's also not just about you. It's about your interactions with other people. And that's where this key relationship piece will take place. It's also important to understand that emotional intelligence, it really can impact our effectiveness in leaders. Or as leaders. In fact, CCL's own research has shown that the primary reason people are derailed in their careers is due to their inability to work effectively at interpersonal relationships or building teams or just having an inability to change. A lack of emotional intelligence is correlated with the likelihood of derailment, and there's a positive correlation between superior performance and emotional intelligence. What I'll add to this is that my dissertation was called A Leader's Level of Emotional Intelligence and Its Impact on Employee Engagement. And certainly in my study, I saw, too, a direct correlation. When a leader had a high level of emotional intelligence, employee engagement scores were also high. So emotional intelligence and your role as a leader. You know, for too many years, we've actually seen and focused on technical skills and IQ. and we saw them as a greater predictor of success. Well, more recent research has demonstrated that really you need all three. So I wouldn't even go so far as to say, well, you just need to now, have a high level of emotional intelligence. So you need all three. You need that IQ, you need the technical skills, and you need emotional intelligence in order to be that well-rounded leader. And as leaders, our emotions can impact others. Reality of the matter is that our emotions are contagious. Our emotions pour out of us. And so they influence not only how we think and feel, but how we behave towards others. Our emotions influence everyone around us. I'm sure you all have been in situations where someone has come into the room, you are having a great time, and they just brought the room down. The feel of the room was brought down. So, when we look at this spectrum here, if we're highly negative, we can transmit that to others. Yet at the same time, we can have a tendency to show up exceedingly positive, not realizing that this extreme may result in negative consequences as well, such as you're so positive you're not willing to address an issue, so problems go unaddressed. So ideally as leaders, we need to show up in such a way that we can provide a balance of emotions where we're able to successfully express both positive and negative emotions. And this is what we mean by emotionally intelligent leaders. These types of leaders can regulate emotions by using practical strategies for dealing with their own and others' emotions. And really, at the end of the day as leaders, it's really about choosing an appropriate way to express our emotions. I love this quote here from Barbara Fredrickson, a former member of the CCO Board of Governors, also professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and this is what she talks about choice. She says, life gives us negativity on its own. It's our job to create positivity. And so positivity is a choice. It's a choice we all need to make again and again, day after day. Your emotions are as far from random as they are from fixed by your genes. And the more you value positivity, the more often its upward spiral will lift you to new heights. The more positivity you seed and harvest, the better become your prospects for flourishing. And I love that. I want to just make a point here to say that when we're talking about positivity, it's not just that we're going to focus on just the positive emotions. It's about choosing, right, how you're going to use those emotions in a positive way. So the emotional intelligence framework that you see on the screen there, this has been widely accepted by a variety of researchers in the field of emotional intelligence, including some of the very first researchers on the topic, John Meyer, Peter Salovey, as well as Daniel Goleman. And you'll see this in a lot of different models. What I want to pull out really are what I would call the essential components of emotional intelligence, which includes self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Let's take a look at each of the components. So I always say, if you're going to start somewhere, start with self. So that means self-awareness. This is our ability to know our emotions, as well as our strengths and our limitations, and to recognize their impact on performance as well as relationships. So while we have to be self-aware, that's so not enough. We also need to know how to regulate our behaviors, and that's where self-management comes into play. So self-management is the ability to control both positive and negative emotions and impulses so that we can be flexible and adaptable as situations warrant. So once we better understand and we've learned to manage self, then we can move to others, right? That's not what we tend to do. We tend to look at others first and then look at self. But we need to examine self and look at others. So social awareness is that ability to have empathy for others, to navigate politically, and to network proactively. And we manage our relationship with others through this final component that we're calling relationship management. So this is the ability to inspire through persuasive communication, motivation, building bonds, as well as disarming conflict among individuals. And it's not that any one component is more important than the other. Really, we need all four of these. So let's look and dive a little deeper into self-awareness and self-management. I've got an exercise that I want you all to do here. I want us to talk about our triggers or our hot buttons. So what are triggers or hot buttons? Well, these are people or situations or things that tend to provoke a destructive response. And the hotter the button, the likely it's going to produce some type of negative emotion, a feeling that you're being provoked, an automatic impulsive response like a knee-jerk reaction, or an increased sense of tension. So what I want you to do is in the chat box, I want you to write no more than 2 words that describe one of your hot buttons. And let me give you an example of my hot button. So one of my hot buttons is tardiness. I just really don't like it when people are late or they wait till the last minute to do something. And so what I try to do, I know that that's me. And so I try to be proactive. Maybe a project is due as a team on Friday, then I might schedule a meeting on Wednesday to be able to deal with that because I know that's a trigger for me. So I'm looking, wow, so many things. Last minute, dishonesty, disrespect, missing deadlines, closed-minded, tardiness, someone else is there. Dishonesty is repeated. Condescending, procrastination, lazy, lack of respect, dishonesty as if they're a lot, arrogance, inconsistency, name dropping, disengage, playing politics, blame shifting, bullying, unorganized, oh yeah, that gets me too, no cooperation, biases, ignored, loud, no accountability, egotistical. So, I mean, we know our hot buttons. And what I'm going to invite you to do as I go through this activity and the rest of the session is keep those in mind because that's a part of self-awareness. If you know that's a hot button, then you're self-aware of that. What do you do, to be proactive in managing managing that as you're dealing with other people? Because guess what? It is, in fact, going to happen. Someone's going to push it. So now what happens when it's triggered? How are then our emotions generated? So as you can see from this visual here, first there's some kind of event or situation that happens. And then, we kind of assess it. We look at the situation and we think about what it might be or what it might not be. And then thirdly, we have some kind of response. Well, how we handle this, excuse me, is where that emotional intelligence comes into play. So if we just have a knee-jerk reaction, that really is a natural response of the amygdala. So let's think about the brain and how it functions. So the amygdala is a part of the brain where emotions are given meaning and attached to responses. It's part of the limbic system. And so when it's triggered, it activates this fight or flight response, which is completely natural. What I'm suggesting is that we hijack the amygdala, right? So we look at how we can come up with a better response than to simply go into fight or flight. And the example that I'd like to use for that is what I'll do, let's say I received an email and maybe someone attacked me in the email or they said something that wasn't true, whatever the case may be. My knee-jerk reaction is to type up a response and send it. What I've learned to do in terms of hijacking my amygdala is I will go on and type the email. This is full transparency. But what I'll do is I'll hold on to it, and I'll come back to it either at the end of the day or the next day. I'll hold it as a draft. And in more cases than not, then I've had time to kind of not have a knee-jerk reaction, and I process it and think about a more appropriate or politically correct way of responding. And maybe in that case, I might be asking lots of questions to get understanding before, in fact, I do have a response. So we have a lot of options of how we can regulate those responses to those triggers. Let's do another scenario. Let's think, for example, you're at a dinner party, someone walks in unexpected, and you're not excited to see them. Well, you could head from, kind of the place that you are, from the bar to the living room to the kitchen, just to avoid them. Well, that's what we call situation modification. So you've just adjusted the situation, but guess what? It's still there. Or let's say, for example, you're in the same room, but instead of looking over at him or her, you can focus on the person to whom you're talking, or the flowers in the vase above the mantle. That's what we call attention focus. And let's jump to this last one, suppression. You can bottle up the anger or sadness or irritation that comes up and suppress it. So I'm going to say of the situation modification, attention focus, and suppression, suppression is likely the worst approach, as this emotion stays in the body. The healthy response would be what we call cognitive reappraisal, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot as we move forward. So this strategy is typically engaged before full-blown emotional responses develop. It's our way of altering our emotional response that would be more successful than avoiding or suppressing our emotion. And so here, you're recognizing the negative emotions you have, but you ultimately turn it into a more positive response, okay? So maybe you see this person not for how they can help, or not for what they may have done or said or whatever, but maybe how they can help you. Go back to my example of the tardiness. I know that this is my trigger. I know I get very upset, very angry when it's triggered, but what can I do proactively to be able to address it? And or let's say I'm dealing with someone who does this repeatedly. Maybe I go and I have a conversation with them to better understand what's behind it, and so I don't jump to some conclusion or story that I make up in my head. So here we go. And someone did ask, is cognitive reappraisal the same as reframing? I would say, yeah, it's a way of reframing, absolutely. It's a way of you looking at it from a different perspective. So let's look at this picture here. I want you to type two things in the chat room. The first thing, and put them together so I can read them that way. First, I want you to answer the question, what emotion do you think this person is feeling? Just one word. And then what do you think happened right before this photo was taken, okay? So let your response be the emotion and then the event. So I'm seeing, anger, and maybe it was an argument. Frustration, she stubbed her toe. I love that. Pain, and she stubbed her toe. That's good. Anger, maybe there was a personal attack. Frustration over a bad conversation. Another stubbed the toe. Scared, something threatening came in their way. Frustration, they didn't have expectations again. Someone provoked them. Frustration, they lost a debate. Maybe they were pumped about winning. Explosive anger, unfaithful spouse. So, I mean, it could go on and on and on, right? So when we look at all of our triggers, we know that we have choices in deciding how to deal with these situations in order to manage our emotional response. And this is because we become self-aware along with managing our responses. I think it's fascinating that we were able to look at this photograph of someone we do not know and name an emotion we think the person is feeling and can tell a story about what happened. And why can we do this? probably because maybe we've had this expression ourselves at some point, and we know what happened to give us that look, so we empathize, or maybe we've seen this happen to someone else, and so that's the story that we've come up with. Well, one of the reasons that we can interpret emotions and imagine a story for someone we just saw a picture of is that our brains are constantly appraising or making sense of all the information that we're taking in. So in this process, we often make guesses about what's going on based on our own past experiences and maybe even specific experiences with people that are close to us. However, in the process, we often make assumptions and we fill in the gaps of information. Sometimes we're right, and other times we really are just jumping to conclusions that are not necessarily correct. In fact, research has shown that we give each other, I'm going to say, stuff, right? So I walk by someone in the hallway after a meeting, I say hi, I get no response, stuff. Someone responds to me using what I consider a harsh tone, stuff. The email that comes to us is in all caps, stuff. Or the email I write asking for feedback and I get nothing. So stuff. So there's a natural human reaction to that stuff, right? We take it personally. We think it's about us. Then we really get excited because we tend to make up a story about the stuff. And of course, in that story, of course, we paint the picture that the other person is really looked upon in a poor way. They're the villain, or that we see them as a villain. And we tend to paint ourselves in a good light in the story. We're the hero or we're the victim. Well, what's sad about this human tendency is that we tend to lose focus on what is most important, and that's the relationship. What are we trying to accomplish together, or what's the work that we're trying to do? And the real kicker is that more often than not, it's not about us. There is something going on with the other person that we're not aware of, and we interpret the interaction as if it's just about us. And there are reasons for this human tendency. Neuroscience has even been able to show us that we tend to see and hold on to and pay attention to negative stimuli more than positive stimuli. And so this is an important development because we need to recognize dangerous situations in order to protect ourselves, right? So we need to know where the saber-toothed tiger and the venomous snake lives. So our brains develop to let those negative reactions really stick. They say that negative emotions are like Velcro, right? And they can be. But today, not everything is a saber-toothed tiger. So when that email that's in all caps come in, our brain initially treats it like the tiger. We still experience things as if everything holds the same amount of negative impact. And our default reactions are fight, flight, or freeze. Well, in order to move beyond our defaults, we have to make intentional choices to effectively manage stress and conflict. And the good news is that neuroscience research has shown us that we can actually change our defaults. I love that. The brain is plastic and changeable. Old models of neuroscience assumed that the brain was fairly static and that our brains finished developing in our early 20s. But we now know that our brains continue to grow and change and rewire throughout our entire lives, and that when we learn new skills, we're actually rewiring our brains, and over time, we can actually change our default responses. So this is the idea behind brain-based leadership development, and now we can see how we can put cognitive reappraisal really at work. So we can change our stories. We can change our assumptions and therefore change our actions. Look at these 4 different ways of reframing. Someone asked, is cognitive reappraisal reframing? That's part of it. Here's a way we can reframe. So 1, we can focus on thoughts. Notice what assumptions we're making or what stories we're telling ourselves. We can consider what might else be going on for the other person that could explain their behavior. Maybe consider what compassion or empathy we could give to the other person, knowing there's likely something else going on for them. And if needed, guess what? Check in with the other person with concern, not judgment, and listen to what was going on for them, just as with that leader did for me, who showed care and concern. Another key component of social awareness is this whole idea around empathy. And really, empathy and developing it can be a bridge between the awareness of our own emotions and the awareness or recognition of emotions of others. I love what Teresa Weissman has here. She says, try to see the world as others see it, to be non-judgmental about others' perceptions, to work to understand another person's feelings, and to communicate your understanding of that person's feelings. And I know many of you have probably seen this iceberg before. I love it. I use it a lot of times in a lot of different topics. It's such a great analogy. But, you know, we say people are like icebergs. And when I look at this and I think about people, I would say there's really a lot going on more under the surface that we cannot see with people. You know, people don't always show their negative emotions or triggers, and so we don't always know what they are. Now, above the surface, we can observe people's actual behaviors, their words and tone of voice, but what's really under the surface? You know, things like expectations or their hopes, their dreams, their biases, their past experiences, their intentions, challenges, their accomplishments. You know, there's a lot more below the surface. And here's an interesting fact. When icebergs collide, they collide below the surface. And the same is typically true for us as well. If we have conflicts with people, they're likely to occur because of something that's occurring beneath the surface. And when those collisions occur, well, usually emotions are at play, which is why we need to fine-tune our emotional intelligence. So I'm going to give you some time, actually, to make this personal. I want you to think about a work situation where you were caught up in making up a story about someone else and their actions, where you were taking something personally. And here are 4 questions I want you to ask yourself, okay? So we're not going to share this, but I hope you have something to write with. Or if you have your phone, you could just jot something down. But just think about the event. Okay, what actually happened? No interpretation. What happened in that event? So get an event in your mind. And now I want you to think about, what story did you tell yourself about that event? Let's be honest with one another. Now here's a challenge. How might you tell that story in a new way, where you're using empathy? What could be another story? And then the 4th part, and this is really where social awareness and relationship management come into play, where you're asking yourself, well, what could be going on for the other person? And even if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, this is really a good way of being able to catch ourselves. We want to be more socially aware. We want to have better relationships. We have to start with ourselves and realize that oftentimes we do make up stories, but there could be another story. But guess what? What if you actually talk to the person to maybe find out what happened or what's going on kind of in their world? I'm going to give you another example, and then I'll move on. I have a new partner that I'm working with, and I realized that I haven't been, we were working on a project, and I haven't been copied on all the communications. And so I could come up with some stories, and guess what I did? Boy, this person is not a team player. Everyone has everything going on. Maybe he doesn't like me. But I could look at it again. I could say, wow, maybe he just forgot. And what else might be going on in this person's life? That might be preventing them from maybe doing the follow-through that I would like for them to do. And better still, what if I, decided to have a little meeting? Hey, could we connect? And I just talk about, hey, I noticed, last week the communication was sent out and I was not copied. This is how it made me feel. Is there something that, that we can do, so I can ensure that I'm included? But it's, opening up that dialogue, okay? It's opening the dialogue. And so just kind of bringing it all together here, what we know is that to be an effective leader, we have to start with being self-aware. We've got to know ourselves and know our preferences, and then intentionally choose to manage our responses to others or to situations, right? We've got to practice self-management, practice cognitive reappraisal. It also means that we have to practice social awareness, and we have to learn to read others more accurately. And the best way I can do that is to really go to the person and talk to them, because, again, I can come up with all kinds of stories. And we do that because we know the importance of relationship management, right? You're choosing the most appropriate responses to achieve the results that you're after. And here's the beautiful thing about emotional intelligence is that when you develop your emotional intelligence, and I always see this as a foundational piece, you're then able to improve on so many other competencies like your communication skills, your feedback skills, dealing with change management, even serving in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. All of these things, your ability to influence, if you're better aware of how you are and you work with other people, become socially aware and understand at the core relationship, and that relationship is what's most important. So I'm going to leave you with these really quick and easy things for looking at how to build your emotional intelligence. I would say when you're in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, pause. Time is your friend. Time always buys you time and allows you to be more resilient. Be self-aware. The most important thing you can do is recognize your emotions in the present moment. It's like a muscle. You'll get stronger at this skill the more often you identify it and you learn to flex it. Look at having an accountability partner or someone to talk to. Avoid suppressing negative emotions because they really do take a toll on your health. And I'll just do a little quick shout out on this one here with my, in terms of looking at accountability partners. Early on, before I was married, my husband has become kind of my accountability partner, but my sister Karen really was a person I would go to. If I had a story in my head, I'd go to her and say, hey, this is what happened. How do you read this? And she would inevitably have a completely different perspective, which helps to shed some light on things. So it's important to especially get with someone who doesn't think perhaps the way you do. Practice reappraisal. Be intentional about reframing something, looking at it in a different way. And then here are 5, ask yourself, what would I feel if I were this person and in their shoes? What else might they have going on in their life? And so be curious about why they're responding the way they do. So what I want to do is I would love for you to write one commitment that you can make towards improving your emotional intelligence as a leader, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So just in the chat box, just one thing of everything that I have covered here with you all today, what's one thing you can do to improve your emotional intelligence? Okay, pause, take a breath, work on empathy, stop making up stories, breathe, be more aware, more curious, practice appraisal, empathy. I see a lot of pausing. I think a lot of people learn from that pause. Seeking feedback. Don't send that email right away. Oh boy, that's going to save you so much. Exercise, curiosity, don't react. Stop overthinking. Yes, stop and don't assume. Consider alternatives. Pause and think. Use humor. That's a good one as well. Pause, take breaths. Use an empathy map. That's really, really great. Pause and identify. Learn to laugh. Don't need to take things so seriously. Analyze other situations. I love it. I love it. I love it. So with that, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we have just under 15 minutes, so I tried to leave enough time here so we can answer questions. I did see one question, and I'll go back through my slides. Someone wanted to know the 4 qualities of empathy, and I know that was Teresa Weissman's slide. So let me go back to that for you, and I'll put that back on the screen. But Michelle, what questions do we have?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelley. This has been a great presentation, especially for me personally. I like to ruminate over things, so I've got some takeaways here that I can help with that. So I've got a couple questions coming in. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat to all participants or all panelists, and we will try and get them for the next 10 minutes. The next one here is, can you speak to the increasingly identified autistic or neurodiverse employees who may have a different set of social norms? And I don't mean to imply that the neurodiverse cannot develop emotional intelligence, but are there any studies addressing this cognitive diversity and its role on emotions?
Wow, that's something I need to look into a little further, to be honest with you. So if you will make sure I get that person's name, and I know we have emails for everyone, I'd like to go and pull up a few studies on that. I mean, I think, again, us being more understanding of how we might interact with someone and being aware that, you know, people are different, whatever that dynamic might be, is really kind of core. But please let me do a little bit more research on that, and I'd be happy to send something your way.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. We'll get that over to you. So another question: what if you actually know what's behind the story and that the person doesn't want to, but the person doesn't want to recognize and change it? Like, how do you handle situations like that where you're trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but you know that they're not going to really recognize anything behind that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of our reality. You know, maybe you've had a conversation. I would say if you haven't had a conversation, you make sure you have the conversation. And, you know, I used to do a lot of training sessions on personality styles, and people would say, well, that's just who I am. And I would say, well, if that's who you are, is what you're working towards, you know, is being effective on a team, then you have to learn to manage your personality. So, I mean, I think one of the things I would do in that situation is come around or identify the core and common good between the two of you. So maybe they're not doing something to help you, but they're doing it for the betterment of whatever it is you're in together. A real funny story about my husband and I, and this is not that, you know, he was trying to do something, but when we first got married, he'd come home and I would want to, you know, have a conversation with him, and he would head to the closet to change his clothes, and I made up a story. Oh boy, you know, this is what he's avoiding me. He doesn't want to talk. Again, those are my stories. But I talked to him and said, you know, I just really need time to just unwind. If you could give me that, and then we can have conversation, that would be great. And so here's where the give and take took place. So what I realized is that, guess what? Maybe I can't talk to him right now. That's fine. But for the good of the marriage, of the relationship, this is where I say, okay, great, take the time you need, and when you're ready, then we have great conversation. So I give that example really to express the fact that there's a give and take. Some things you might have to accept, and then you have to do something different. But I think being able to try to find the common good that you're both working towards is really important. So try that. Those are two different things that you can do as a way to help move that situation along a little further.
Great, and I think that kind of leads into our next question, maybe, to what are some tactics to help others be more self-aware? So I think you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, and again, first what you can do when you're trying to make other people become more self-aware, maybe you share how you become more self-aware. So I wouldn't approach someone to say, you need to be more self-aware because you do X, Y, Z. But I might say, I took this webinar on emotional intelligence, and I realized that I have some, trigger points. I need to be more aware of kind of maybe how I'm being perceived. It really made me think about that. Here are some of my trigger points. What about yourself? So it's really kind of hard to tell someone else to be self-aware. It's going to be a whole lot easier if you lead by example. And especially if you're on a team, hey, why not do kind of an activity or exercise, come up with there are a lot of different checklists and things of that nature, maybe online, where you can get people to start thinking about it. And certainly we offer a workshop around that. But it's hard to make someone else self-aware, but I think lead by example, that's kind of the best thing.
Great. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions around that same topic. But another question coming in is, can you give an example to illustrate the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Yeah, when we think about, and this comes up a lot in terms of empathy and sympathy. Empathy means that, well, when we talk about sympathy and empathy, one is that you know someone, you've been in someone's situation, so you can sympathize with them, right? But empathy, I may not have been in your situation, but you know what? I'm willing to extend grace and mercy to you, given that. So sympathy is more, I can relate because I've been through it, and empathy is I'm willing to, kind of accept that this is what you're going through and being concerned with you, but may not be something that I've actually gone through. And it's okay that I haven't gone through it, but I'm extending you that grace and that mercy because of that.
Great. I've got another one. What is a good tool or process to gain patience?
To gain patience. Ooh, that's a lifetime. Wow. That's really good. That's really good. I guess I could just think about myself just over time. It was about self-awareness, really. It was my recognition that I'm not patient. And so when I began realizing that I'm not real patient, and depending upon what the situation is, then I would come up with something to just kind of help me to do that. And some little things that you can do to practice patience, in the whole realm of resiliency, just learning to calm yourself down, doing breathing activities, just doing kind of yoga exercises. I mean, all those kinds of things help to slow you down. But I think that you're on the right path because, number one, you're self-aware that, okay, I'm not patient. So then, maybe someone, you want someone to send you a report by 5 o'clock, this afternoon. Maybe you ask yourself, do I really need that person to do that? So come, put it back on yourself. Question yourself. Am I putting more on people than is necessary or needed? So, manage. That's the part here. Do some self-management. But again, over time, you're on the right track because you realize you're impatient. And so be proactive at looking at those situations and extending people, a little bit more time to do what needs to get done. Maybe people don't catch on as quickly as you do. That's okay. We're not all on the same track. Or I should say timetable.
Yeah, and I love that you guys are answering your own questions too in the chat. That's a great conversation going on as well.
Oh, awesome.
Another one here. We've got maybe if an employee is prone to anxiety or stress more than the average, would this potentially impact their emotional intelligence?
Oh, for sure, because I would say that they're probably not doing a great job of self-management. So maybe they're not even aware that, of their stressors. So, absolutely. Because usually we've got responses, right? We have an event that triggers an emotional response. It's about how you manage. And so if they're not finding productive ways of managing those emotions, absolutely. And again, this might be something you want to bring to your team. I wouldn't call it out on one person. This would be a great team activity to learn a little bit more about. You could even use the activity I just did with the story. Let's all think of an event, where we created a story and, what can we do to better learn about ourselves and to manage our responses? That could be one way to start the conversation. There are also a lot of online videos. YouTube has an assortment of videos on self-management and just some techniques that I've actually often referred people to.
Great. Looks like we have time for a couple more. How do you manage, let's see, which one was it? How do you manage overly positive people who ignore problems and therefore don't want to troubleshoot to solve it? So this kind of goes in with some of the other questions from earlier, but overly positive people.
So, I think, again, the self-awareness, because the thing is you don't want to, tell someone they're overly positive, but you really do have to call people on, kind of where they are. The other thing is, and here I'm going to go back to social awareness, why is it? Why are they overly positive? What's behind that? Try to learn a little bit more and do it in a way that, wouldn't be threatening, but maybe better understand, kind of what's behind that. Think about the iceberg. Are they so overly positive on the surface because there's some things that they're dealing with under the surface? So that's what I would say to you. Try to better understand that person so you can understand what's below the surface. Oftentimes, what I'll say, people say, well, how do you become more socially aware? How can you, learn more about people and do it in a way that makes them comfortable? One of the things that I do is, and I know, again, we're all kind of, working remotely, but think about things that were maybe on their desk or things that they talked about, starting a conversation. Oh, did anyone do anything fun this weekend? And so it gives you an opportunity to learn more about people below the surface. So I said those things below the surface are like disappointments, expectations, dreams, hopes. What's below the surface that might be causing this? But I think also being able to go to the person and helping them understand the impact of, them not doing what's needed, that's an important discussion. That's giving feedback. So I don't think that's so much. It's emotional intelligence in that you're willing to be socially aware, but for the sake of the relationship, and you may have to bring to that person, specific examples of situations that occurred and the behaviors that occurred and then the impact of those behaviors. That's absolutely legitimate.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellie. This was very valuable. really, that concludes today's webinar. Tomorrow, everyone will receive a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording, as well as relevant articles on emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and empathy. Shelley, I'll turn it over to you to close it out.
Well, thank you all so much for being so engaged, for being willing to chat with me in the chat box. I appreciate all of the comments I'm seeing. Thank you. This was super helpful. That certainly makes me feel wonderful. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for your time, and certainly connect with us. If your question did not get answered, I believe that Michelle will send those my way. I'll get them answered, and then we'll send them out to you. So thanks again. Have a great rest of the day and week, and thanks again for tuning in.
All right, this was perfect. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, and please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.